What is the mind? What is consciousness? Where does it come from? Is it a product of the brain, or is it a separate independent process? These questions have intrigued mankind's most eminent thinkers and researchers for millennia, and are part of an ongoing scientific and philosophical debate called the mind-body problem. In this first episode of Do You Mind, we will have a closer look at the widely accepted physicalist interpretation of the mind as a product or emergent property of the brain, its origin, scientific basis, and why it is still debated today. For early philosophers like Plato, the mind and body are fundamentally distinct and separable, a view also shared by late antiquity's Thomas Aquinas. Such a concept has led to a myriad of philosophical interpretations under the general concept of dualism. More recent views also offer a variety of interpretations, which can be broken down into a few main interpretations or theories. Physicalism and variations like emergentism hold that all things, including mental states and consciousness, are physical or the result of physical phenomena. Here, the mind is a product of the brain, and thus reducible to neuronal activity. In direct opposition to physicalism is idealism, which holds that consciousness or the mind is fundamental, and that reality as we know it, including our own bodies, is mentally constituted. 16th century René Descartes introduced substance dualism, which holds that the mind is non-physical and has a foundation that is distinct to that of the body. Property dualism and variations like epiphenomenalism hold that both mind and body are different emergent properties of the same physical primary substance. Eliminative materialism holds that mental states do not actually exist, and consequently, neither does the mind-body problem. Physicalism is the majority view among philosophers, within academia, the scientific community, modern medicine, neuroscience, psychiatry, and most branches of psychology. Since most theories being debated nowadays are variations on the physicalist or epiphenomenon interpretations, studies on the mind often focus on determining its inner workings or attributes by observing the neurological mechanisms of cognition, perception, or conscious experience. Neurobiology has come a long way in understanding the properties of neurons and neural circuits in the various areas of the brain. However, it has never produced a satisfying mechanistic explanation for individual instances of subjective, conscious experience, also known as qualia. This open issue in sciences of the mind is called the explanatory gap, a term coined by philosopher Joseph Levine in 1983. Echoing the theories of Levine and Thomas Nagel, philosopher David Chalmers has called this issue the hard problem of consciousness. He states, "It is widely agreed that experience arises from a physical basis, but we have no good explanation of why and how it so arises. Why should physical processing give rise to a rich inner life at all? It seems objectively unreasonable that it should, and yet it does. If any problem qualifies as the problem of consciousness, it is this one." Before we can properly analyze the physicalist interpretation of the mind, we must first analyze its underlying philosophical premises called physicalism, and its supporting scientific evidence. Physicalism is a metaphysical thesis closely linked to materialism, which states that everything in the universe is physical or its derivative, and that there is nothing over or above the physical. In this view, mental processes supervene on living organisms, which in turn supervene on cells, which supervene on molecules, which supervene on atoms, and finally, on elementary particles. One of the many problems this thesis faces is that it requires, at the base of its causation structure, the premise of the orderly universe once presented by classical or Newtonian physics. Yet, recent advances in modern physics raise serious questions as to the fundamental nature of reality. The MOND-G2 experiment at Fermilab, a particle physics and accelerator laboratory near Chicago, Illinois, corroborates prior findings obtained in 2001 at Brookhaven Laboratory, which highly suggest the presence of new forces, particles or laws of physics that are not predicted by the best theory that we have so far, the Standard Model of particle physics. According to CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research responsible for particle accelerators like the Large Hadron Collider located near Geneva, theoretical models and cosmological observations suggest that the universe is made of approximately 68% dark energy, 27% of dark matter, and only 5% of normal, baryonic matter that is actually observable. That is to say, all galaxies, solar systems, inorganic matter and living organisms, the very fabric of reality according to physicalism, only accounts for 5% of the known universe. That leaves us with a staggering 95% of matter and energy that are totally unaccounted for by the current model. The world-renowned and widely replicated double-slit experiment fires photons or electrons through two slits, which then land on a surface or sensor. Instead of two slightly rectangular shapes, an unexpected interference pattern occurs, demonstrating that photons, electrons, and all matter exhibit both wave-like and particle-like properties. Introduced in 1927, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle states that both the position and momentum of a particle cannot be precisely measured, while non-locality and entanglement postulate a strangely holistic principle of interconnectedness operating at the quantum level, which contradicts the localistic assumptions of classical physics. Profoundly strange theories in quantum physics postulate the existence of a multiverse, or a parallel world possibly made of quintessential matter, outside the known spectrum of physical phenomena. Such a hypothetical property of the universe will help in understanding many of the uncommon mental phenomena to be explored in future episodes of Do You Mind? Regardless of the many interpretations of quantum physics, it raises serious questions on the fundamental nature of reality, and consequently, on what brains and minds essentially are. What level of certainty can we grant to researchers who claim that the mind is the result of certain physical processes, when their subatomic structure is essentially unknown? Such an issue also highlights the methodological problem of observational bias, or assumptions in the characterization of an object of study, the cornerstone of the scientific method. Yet, conscious experience is subjective in nature, and cannot be weighed, measured, or observed using sophisticated equipment. Without the possibility to directly observe the mind, researchers resort to observing and monitoring the brain, and its neurochemical activity, assuming it to be the cause of mental processes. But as we have seen, recent theories in quantum mechanics are undermining the very notion of objectivity in both organic and inorganic matter, while some researchers are humble enough to recognize that we are no longer sure what the universe is essentially made of. Without a proper understanding of the subatomic world upon which molecules and cells supervene, any assumptions on organic matter, and its alleged emergent properties such as the mind, will be speculative at best. Thus, building hypotheses and theories based on the observation of organic matter alone, without taking into account the non-observable forces, laws or fields responsible for its subatomic organization, invariably leads to a superficial inquiry, and methodological issues of considerable proportions. Additionally, given the rate at which modern physics brings new theories and insights on the increasingly elusive nature of reality, premises like, "there is nothing over or above the physical," are likely to be proven entirely wrong. A century from now, teenage students may even grin in amusement when learning about 20th century physicalism, which is relatively just as naive and uncertain as 15th century alchemy, with its four classical elements of air, earth, fire and water, in addition to philosophical elements of sulfur and mercury. Such were the irreducible components of the universe back then, and so are the elementary particles of the Standard Model today. Most supporters of the physicalist interpretation of the mind as a product of neurological activity are unaware that the experimental evidence to support their view is not as solid and compelling as one would expect from such an overwhelmingly accepted theory. From a purely unacademic, subjective point of view, we can all agree that a clinically dead individual no longer speaks or moves, nor does it trigger monitoring equipment. But does this imply that the mind has therefore ceased to exist? If the mind is, in fact, an emergent property of neuronal activity, then the mind should therefore vanish, like the light emitted by a bulb that is suddenly turned off. As we shall see, this understanding is not based on factual evidence, but on the subjective experience of witnessing the bodily death of an individual, and interpreting such phenomenon through the lens of reductionist philosophical theses like physicalism, materialism, or Nietzsche's nihilism. Yet, much like birth, the phenomenon of bodily death can be interpreted in different ways. The advances made by modern medicine in facilitating birth, curing fatal illnesses and extending life expectancy are truly remarkable achievements. However, facilitating or temporarily impeding a given phenomenon are means of intervention or manipulation, not causation. A living organism has never been created out of nothing, nor has it ever been granted immortality by scientists or doctors. In other words, modern science does not have authority over life and death. With these important philosophical considerations in mind, and without further delay, let's look at the scientific basis for the physicalist interpretation of the mind as an emergent property or epiphenomenon of brain activity. The fields of modern science that are closely or remotely concerned with the human mind, that is, psychiatry, most branches of psychology, cognitive science, anthropology, artificial intelligence, and linguistics, are all based on the physicalist interpretation of the mind proposed by cognitive neuroscience, a branch of neuroscience and psychology which studies how mental processes are allegedly produced by neural circuitry. Thus, this is where we must look to analyze the scientific basis or premises used as the cornerstone for the entire spectrum of scientific fields related to the mind. Since the mind itself is non-observable, cognitive neuroscience studies the biological processes and neural connections, seemingly responsible for cognition. By studying the correlations between cognitive experiences reported by individuals and the observable neurological processes in their brains, researchers can determine with amazing precision the brain areas related to a given experience. For example, the neural activity related to the sensation caused by the color blue, or the smell of a flower. The main argument presented in favor of the physicalist interpretation is the possibility to artificially trigger conscious experiences through neural stimulation or manipulation. By manipulating neural contents, neuroscientists can affect phenomenal content. In other words, by stimulating or manipulating the mechanics of the brain, either physically or through the use of chemicals, they can trigger experiences, alter cognition, perception, and properties of the mind such as personality. With the demonstration of a correlation between the stimulation of a certain brain area and their corresponding experiences, researchers assume they have demonstrated the neural basis of conscious experiences, and consequently, of the mind. However, correlation does not imply causation. The Cambridge Dictionary defines correlation as a connection or relationship between two or more facts, numbers, etc. Meanwhile, It defines causation as the process of causing something to happen or exist. Correlations alone cannot be considered an experimental proof of causation. To illustrate this observation, we will use a stimulus-based psychological response that nearly everyone has experienced before: the smell of a specific aroma or fragrance that triggers memories of a distant past, a long-forgotten period of childhood, a subtle flashback filled with spatial and temporal details we can only intuitively apprehend. Would it be accurate to say that the stimulus, here the aroma or fragrance, is the cause of the phenomenal content or memories? Clearly, it is not. In the same way, the stimulation of a specific area of the brain which causes an individual to have, for example, a spiritual experience, cannot be considered the cause of the experience, when it is merely a trigger for cognition. The activation of a certain area of the brain and a synchronous conscious experience surely suggests an association, but does not constitute a factual demonstration of causation. Nor does it prove that a given memory or sensation is stored in the brain tissue, like a chunk of data would on a hard drive. The incapacity for neuroscientists to pinpoint a location for memories in the brain has given rise to surprisingly holistic hypotheses, such as attributing memory to the whole body, a move considered by some as a desperate attempt at saving physicalism from obsolescence. Invariably, correlations do not offer hard evidence supporting the physicalist interpretation, but rather simple or complex observations of biological mechanisms and cognitive experiences simultaneously occurring at the conscious level. Another commonly cited argument used to support a neural causation for the mind is brain damage. A famous case is Phineas Gage, a 25-year-old foreman working on a railroad in Cavendish, Vermont. He was using an iron tamping rod to pack explosive powder in a hole, when the latter unexpectedly detonated. The burst sent the rod straight through his skull, damaging much of his left frontal lobe. He unbelievably survived the incident and did not show motor, speech or memory impairments. His personality, however, notably changed during a period of time, to the point that some of his colleagues said he was no longer Gage. This alteration in personality led many researchers to postulate that both personality and the mind were emergent properties of the brain, and this case was hailed as a proof for the neural causation of the mind. The problem with this conclusion is that the aftermath of this accident can be seen both as a proof for the physicalist interpretation, as much as a proof against it. If emotions, speech control and reasoning continue to exist in an individual with much of his left frontal lobe destroyed, then we could also conclude that such mental processes are not emergent properties of this area of the brain after all. Additionally, rare but well-documented cases show that certain individuals actually gain supranormal mental capabilities in areas such as art, music, calendar calculating, mathematics and mechanical or spatial skills, as a result of brain damage. 30-year-old Jason Padgett was a typical partygoer college dropout, with no interest in academic studies, until he was mugged and hit on the head. He suffered traumatic brain injury which resulted in a newly acquired ability to intuitively understand math and physics, and he developed the astonishing ability to draw the complex geometric shapes he saw everywhere. His stunning, mathematically precise artwork drew the attention of a physicist who recognized the high-level mathematics he was drawing, even though Padgett hadn't progressed beyond pre-algebra in his math studies before the incident. He was later formally diagnosed with acquired savant syndrome and a form of synesthesia. The savant syndrome also sees individuals gain privileged access to otherwise inaccessible mental content, and normally unused parts of the brain. Snyder and Mitchell argued that such skills reside within everyone, but that they are not normally accessible to conscious awareness. The mechanism responsible for such access remains largely unexplained. Cases like Paget undermine the assumption that brain damage should mandatorily lead to cognitive disabilities, and even corroborate hypotheses where the brain is seen as a kind of reduction valve or interface for the mind, a topic to be further investigated in other episodes of Do You Mind? Clearly, brain damage does not offer a factual demonstration of neurological causation for the mind, but rather shows that the brain circuitry can alter, impede, or enhance the manifestation of the mind at the conscious level, in what we call objective reality. Far from supporting the physicalist interpretation, such phenomena instead raise serious questions on the assumptions found in modern science on what the mind essentially is. Readiness potential is another important argument used to support the physicalist interpretation. In 1964, German neurologist Kornhuber and his postgraduate student Dieck discovered that a neurological impulse gradually increases in the motor cortex for approximately 1 or 2 seconds before a person performs a voluntary action. In the 1980s, physiology researcher Benjamin Libet replicated the experiment and determined that unconscious neurological impulse proceeds by 350 milliseconds. The subject's reported conscious awareness that now he or she feels the desire to make a movement. He concluded that our brain unconsciously plans our behavior and that consequently, we do not truly have free will. This study was hailed as a cornerstone for the physicalist interpretation, but Libet's conclusions were later falsified by other studies, determining that relative free will does exist, since a given movement can be consciously aborted even after the so-called point of no return of 200 milliseconds. Of all the arguments in favor of physicalism, the one using readiness potential to suggest a neurological mental causation is the easiest to refute. The misinterpretation found in Libet's rationale is similar to that of most researchers who have replicated his experiments, an observation bias favored by a mechanistic, materialistic worldview, and the consequent assumption that the brain produces a thought. Here, it is not the brain that unconsciously plans our behavior, but the unconscious mind that stimulates the brain circuitry before such impulse is processed in the motor cortex, reaches conscious awareness, and potentially leads to an action. In summary, cognitive neuroscience does not offer the conclusive, hard evidence or demonstration needed to bring forth a given interpretation as authoritative. In the end, the neurological mental causation of the mind stands among all other interpretations, as a seemingly logical, but inconclusive theory on what the mind might actually be. What if the mind is not an emergent property of the brain after all? What if brain damage or neural stimulation only altered, enhanced or impeded the mind's manifestation within the brain and body, without altering its integrity? The physicalist interpretation of the mind is so deeply rooted in scientific thought, that anyone who dares to question it is either ridiculed or labeled as lunatic or pseudoscientific. Surely, academics who investigate other interpretations are not burnt at the stake for heresy, but will likely see their career opportunities and research funds greatly reduced. Had they provided evidence supporting the mainstream view of the mind, they would likely have acquired recognition and seen their work published in respectable journals. The scientific community has successfully shielded itself from inconvenient empirical data on the mind, by imposing a mechanistic worldview to pupils, presenting physicalist hypotheses as facts in academic literature, and carefully ridiculing the so-called pseudosciences. In light of its lack of factual evidence, and nearly unquestionable authority in modern science, the physicalist interpretation of the mind has righteously acquired the status of scientific dogma. The Macmillan Dictionary defines the word dogma as A belief or set of beliefs that people are expected to accept without asking questions about them. As we can see, the term dogma far exceeds the scope of theology, and can be found in any field of human knowledge. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines dogma as a point of view or tenet put forth as authoritative without adequate grounds. This definition could not be more accurate for the current materialistic status quo pervading much of today's science and philosophy. In the quest to understand the universe and our own existence, modern science must understandably draw a line between factual observation and speculation. In this regard, the scientific method has proven to be the most reliable tool that we have so far, and we shall not diminish its importance in the acquisition of knowledge. Nevertheless, by adopting an attitude of systematic denial towards non-physicalist views on the mind, or on so-called paranormal psychological phenomena, the scientific community is replicating the conservative, dogmatic and rightly criticized posture of the Church Fathers and theologians, towards phenomena or ideas that contradict established truths. Such self-proclaimed unquestionable authority is precisely what science claims to have freed humanity from. By determining that certain objects of study are unworthy of attention, or that fields that study uncommon, abnormal phenomena are illegitimate, the scientific community is paradoxically being unscientific and biased. While the search for knowledge should not have predetermined boundaries, natural science often relies on the highly questionable philosophical thesis known as scientism, which states that science itself is the only true way to acquire knowledge about reality and the nature of things. Such a thesis is largely unfounded for two evident reasons. The acquisition of knowledge in science is invariably confined by our own limitations for logic. And secondly, the variety and complexity found in natural phenomena unmistakably transcends the scope of our senses and most sophisticated equipment. The main types of research paradigms are classified by Collis and Hussey as the positivistic and the phenomenological. By paradigm, they define the progress of scientific practice based on people's philosophies and assumptions about the world and the nature of knowledge. Invariably, a researcher's worldview will impact not only research design and procedures, but also the interpretation of collected data. The dominant positivistic research paradigm has proven to be highly efficient and reliable within the scope of physical science. However, its relevance in regards to uncharacterized objects of study such as the mind remains questionable, in terms of epistemology and methodology. In recent centuries, much has been debated against the dogmas of belief systems and claims of non-physicalist philosophical doctrines. Yet, very little has been done in the sense of eradicating the many dogmatic stances and beliefs within modern science. In the spirit of healthy, unbiased scientific inquiry and much-needed skepticism, methodologically relevant questions must be asked. Why is research almost entirely focused on neurological aspects of the mind, if its neural causation has never been demonstrated? Why are non-physicalist interpretations ridiculed or excluded from scientific discussion, if the physicalist interpretation is not fact-supported? How has an experimentally unsupported interpretation on the mind acquired such level of dominance in both academia and the scientific community? A simple yet profound answer to these questions could be reduced to one single word: convenience. Convenient not only for researchers, but also for philosophers, academia, industry, and a variety of organizations who benefit from the current physicalist or materialist worldview, a topic to be further analyzed in the next episode of Do You Mind? We cannot sufficiently stress this contradiction, in regards to the ultimate purpose of science, which should be to allow a better and unbiased understanding, and not to impose a given ideology, or protect financial or political interests. To better understand the motivations behind the phenomenon of ideological patrolling in both academia and the scientific community, one must analyze the birth of modern science. The 17th century saw Galilei establish the philosophical basis of what would become modern science, which would bloom during the 18th and 19th centuries, propelling the advancement of human knowledge in unprecedented ways. After over 1,000 years of oppression from the Church, human thought was more than ready to break up with religious traditions and to take flight. In the so-called era of reason, exact sciences and positivism, scientists could finally bring a clear physical explanation to all natural phenomena, including the mind. Everything was made of matter, or was its derivative. By reducing the mind to a product, emergent property or epiphenomenon of the brain, science could finally get rid of medieval-era supernatural beliefs, folk superstitions and the dogmas of the Church. It was the physicalist dream come true. Just when science had finally freed humanity from religions, replaced dogmas and traditional morality with allegedly liberating philosophical doctrines like existentialism, when life had become meaningless, when personal free will and reason had become the new gods, when mankind was now mature and rational enough to live without imposed theological moral laws, humanity witnessed two world wars, devastation, brutality and racism on a scale never seen before in the history of mankind. The paradox of liberation and enlightenment of humanity through science, being closely followed by the worst that our species is capable of, certainly leaves room for reflection. The golden age of 19th century's materialism and positivism had elevated matter as the only reliable object of study, and thus, the only source of truth. Yet, by the 20th century, some researchers were introducing a contrasting and frankly bizarre theory on matter and consequently, on living beings and consciousness. As a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about atoms this much: there is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. Max Planck, 1944. The very foundation of physicalism, observable matter, was shown to possess no permanent intensive properties at the subatomic level. Matter was being downgraded from an absolute basis for objectivity or reality, to a transient product of an inexplicably organized and seemingly intelligent agglomeration of forces. The uncertain and probabilistic nature of theories presented by quantum physics infuriated many scientists, including Albert Einstein. Humanity wasn't, and sadly, still isn't ready for such an apparently irrational view of the known universe. Modern physicists would likely disagree with Planck's view on matter and energy being the product of intelligent design, not because they have proven him wrong, but because they cannot tolerate the possibility of consciousness existing without a brain. But one may logically ask, what would a non-material intelligence be like? If we cannot easily probe into the metaphysical aspects of reality, we can still observe laws directing natural phenomena. Regardless of our respective assumptions and beliefs, we can all agree that direction, constraint, order, multiplicity and complexity strongly suggest intent, or will. If we see a drawing in the sand, or a carving on a tree trunk, we can logically deduce that an intelligent individual, must have crafted its lines and shapes. If human intelligence is sufficient to create the greatest painting, build the most advanced computer, or the tallest skyscraper, what unthinkable magnitude of intelligence could establish and fine-tune the laws, forces and constraints that would lead to this? Yet, we shall not engage in the everlasting brawl between science and religion, between evolutionists and creationists. Such a conflict has proven to be an exercise in futility, given the fact that none of the opponents have a clear understanding of the whole. Time has come for humanity to transcend this ideological stalemate and realize that the dichotomy between empirical and intuitive knowledge is purely didactic. Precisely because universal knowledge is not divided in domains or factions. The right position to adopt is neither anti-scientific nor anti-spiritual, but anti-dogma, regardless of the field of knowledge it comes from. We have highlighted that the study of the mind cannot be carried out using the same paradigm used in physical science. We shall also emphasize that human spirituality can, and should, be studied scientifically, in its strikingly universal concepts and manifestations, away not only from the aforementioned scientific secularism, but also away from religious sectarianism, dogmas and mysticism, which only further divide humanity, instead of contributing to a better understanding of our shared existence. In this first episode of Do You Mind, we have highlighted that the physicalist interpretation of the mind as a product of the brain is not supported by factual evidence, that it is nevertheless presented as fact in academic literature, and recognized as authoritative in the scientific milieu. The considerations expressed in this program would be of little practical use if they were limited to criticizing the mainstream view for its lack of factual basis, without presenting other working hypotheses and exploring their scientific basis and capacity to explain phenomena. In the next episode, we will look at evidence that seems to defy the conventional interpretation, instead suggesting that the mind could be an independent process, if not entirely fundamental, to the existence of the body. All this, and much more, on Do You Mind?